The morning sun shone through the tall windows of the new Seoul Superior Court. The building was a mix of old and new, with traditional Korean architecture blending into modern space-age design. Marcus Johnson straightened his tie as he walked through the security scanner. The year was 2157, and even after a century of space colonization, some things hadn't changed as much as they should have. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," said Do-Young Kim, the court clerk. Do-Young was one of the few friendly faces Marcus had come to know in the past 6 months of practicing law on New Seoul. "Judge Park is already in a mood today. Be careful." Marcus nodded, his expression calm and professional. "Thank you for the warning, Do-Young. But you know me. I always come prepared." The case seemed straightforward enough. Marcus was defending Smith & Sons, a small Earth-based shipping company, against Starpath Enterprises, a wealthy Korean megacorporation. The facts were on his side. The evidence was clear, but there was one problem. Judge Ta-Won Park. Marcus entered courtroom 7 and settled at the defense table. He arranged his digital tablets neatly, each one containing carefully prepared arguments. On the other side of the room, Han Sol-lee, the opposing counsel, was already seated. Han Sol gave Marcus a slight nod. At least some people in this system could be professional. "All rise." Do-Young called out as Judge Park entered the courtroom. The judge was a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes. He moved with the stiffness of someone who carried their authority like armor. "Be seated," Park said, his voice sharp. His eyes lingered on Marcus for a moment too long, his lip curling slightly. "We're here for case number 2157-238, Starpath Enterprises versus Smith & Sons Trading Company." He looked at Marcus again. "I see Earth still sends its representatives to handle its cases." Marcus kept his face neutral, though he noticed Do-Young shift uncomfortably at his desk. "Yes, Your Honor. Marcus Johnson representing Smith & Sons Trading Company." "Very well," Park said, making it sound like it was anything but well. "You may proceed with your opening statement." Marcus stood, his movements deliberate and confident. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is about broken promises and corporate responsibility. 6 months ago, Starpath Enterprises signed a contract with my clients." "Speak up," Park interrupted. "Some of us aren't used to your Earth accent." Marcus raised his voice slightly, maintaining his professional tone. "As I was saying, Your Honor, 6 months ago, Starpath Enterprises signed a contract with Smith & Sons. The terms were clear. Starpath would provide safe passage for my client's goods through the Mars-Jupiter shipping lanes. However, Starpath deliberately rerouted the shipments through dangerous asteroid fields to save fuel, resulting in the loss of 3 cargo ships and endangering the lives of Earth crews." "Objection, Your Honor." Han Sol stood up. "Counsel is making accusations without evidence." "You'll have your turn, Counselor Lee," Park said, his tone notably softer when addressing the Korean lawyer. "Continue, Mr. Johnson." Marcus proceeded to present his evidence. He brought up holographic displays showing ship trajectories, communications logs, and safety regulations. His argument was airtight, backed by both colonial and Earth law. But with each point he made, Judge Park's expression grew more disdainful. "And here," Marcus said, highlighting a section of the contract, "Starpath explicitly agreed to use the established safe routes. The evidence clearly shows they violated this agreement." "Evidence from Earth-based sensors," Park scoffed. "Tell me, Mr. Johnson, are you familiar with how our Korean systems work, or do you assume your Earth technology is superior?" "Your Honor," Marcus replied evenly, "the evidence includes data from both Earth and Korean monitoring stations. If you'll look at Exhibit C." "I don't need you to tell me how to examine evidence," Park snapped. "I've been judging cases since before you were practicing law on that overcrowded planet of yours." The courtroom fell silent. Even Han Sol looked uncomfortable now. Marcus took a deep breath and continued. "The data from the Korean stations, which I've highlighted in blue, confirms the dangerous route changes. This isn't about Earth versus Korean technology, Your Honor. It's about the facts of the case. For the next 2 hours, Marcus presented his case methodically. He called witnesses via holographic projection, Earth crew members who had survived the incidents. Park interrupted frequently, questioning their credibility and making subtle jabs about Earth education and training standards. When it was Hansol's turn to present Starpath's defense, the difference in treatment was obvious. Park listened attentively, nodding along, and only interrupted to ask clarifying questions in a respectful tone. The defense's arguments were weak, mainly focused on technicalities about contract interpretation under colonial law. During the lunch recess, Du-young approached Marcus in the hallway. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I've never seen him this bad before." Marcus gave the clerk a small smile. "It's nothing I haven't dealt with before, Du-young. The law is on our side. That's what matters." "But it's not right," Du-young insisted, lowering his voice. "Everyone knows Starpath was cutting corners. They do it all the time, but nobody stands up to them because they have too much influence." "That's exactly why this case is important," Marcus replied. "It's not about me or Judge Park. It's about making sure the law protects everyone equally." When court resumed, Marcus prepared for his closing argument. He had saved his strongest points for last, including evidence that Starpath had attempted to cover up their route changes by altering their logs. But before he could begin, Park raised his hand. "I don't think we need to waste more time here," Park announced. "I'm prepared to rule on this matter." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the defense hasn't presented its closing argument. We have new evidence about the log alterations that—" "Are you questioning my judgment, Mr. Johnson?" Park's voice was cold. "I've heard enough to make my decision. Unless Earth lawyers now presume to teach me colonial law." The message was clear. Marcus slowly sat down, maintaining his dignity despite the murmurs in the courtroom. He could feel Hansol's sympathetic glance from across the room. "This court finds in favor of Starpath Enterprises," Park declared. "While the plaintiff has presented various claims about route changes and safety violations, they failed to properly consider Article 47 of the Colonial Transportation Code, which gives shipping companies discretion in route selection during solar storm seasons." He looked directly at Marcus. "Perhaps if counsel had spent more time studying our laws instead of relying on Earth precedents, this case would have gone differently. It was a complete misapplication of Article 47. The provision only applied to emergency situations, not routine cost-cutting measures." But Park was already standing, preparing to leave the courtroom. "Your Honor," Marcus said, rising one last time, "we wish to file an appeal." Park turned, his contempt barely concealed. "You have that right, Mr. Johnson, though I suggest you find someone more familiar with our system to handle it." With that, he swept out of the courtroom. Marcus began packing his tablets, his movements calm and deliberate. Around him, people were leaving the courtroom, some whispering among themselves. Hansol approached his table. "That was wrong," Hansol said quietly. "Everyone knows it was wrong." "Thank you, Counselor," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "You represented your client well." "Mr. Johnson," Du-young called from his desk, "Judge Park wants the appeal filing by tomorrow morning if you're proceeding." Marcus nodded. "It will be on his desk first thing." He gathered his materials and walked out of the courtroom, his head held high. As he stepped into the afternoon sun, he took out his personal communicator and made a call. "Jae-yun." "Yes, the case went exactly as expected." "No, don't worry. Everything is proceeding according to plan. The Interstellar Judicial Council announcement is still scheduled for next month, correct?" "Good. No, I don't want anything changed. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way." He ended the call and looked up at the towering courthouse. In just a few weeks, he would be back here, but in a very different capacity. For now, though, he had an appeal to write, one that would document every instance of bias and judicial misconduct he had just witnessed. Sometimes justice took the long way around, but it always arrived eventually. Marcus walked to the public transport station, already mentally composing his appeal. Behind him, the sun was setting over New Seoul, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow would be another day in court, another chance to stand up for what was right, and somewhere in his secure files, a document weighted with his name and a new title: Chief Justice of the Interstellar Judicial Council. Judge Park's education in true justice was about to begin. Marcus Johnson sat in his modest office in downtown New Seoul, reviewing the appeal he had filed that morning. The windows of his 20th floor office showed the busy skylanes where flying vehicles moved in orderly lines between the towering buildings. His desk was neat, with just 3 items on it: a digital tablet, a small potted plant from Earth, and an old-fashioned paper photo of his family. A soft chime announced an incoming call. A holographic display showed the familiar face of Sang-min Kang, his mentor from law school and longtime friend. "I heard about what happened in Park's courtroom," Sang-min said, his face concerned. "Are you okay?" Marcus smiled. "I'm fine, Sang-min. You know me. I've dealt with worse." "Yes, but this is different. Park has influence here. He's friends with half the judges in New Seoul, and his brother-in-law runs the largest law firm in the colony." "All the more reason for what's coming next," Marcus replied, his voice calm but determined. He glanced at a locked drawer in his desk, which held his official appointment papers to the Interstellar Judicial Council. Sang-min leaned forward in the hologram. "Speaking of that, are you sure you want to keep it quiet? We could leak the news, show Park what a fool he's been." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't about embarrassing one judge. It's about fixing a broken system. Besides, the background checks aren't complete yet." Just then, his office doors slid open. Jae-yun Cho, Secretary of the Interstellar Judicial Council, walked in. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a serious expression. Marcus ended his call with Sang-min and stood to greet her. "The background checks are done," Jae-yun said without preamble. "Everything's clear. We can announce your appointment as Chief Justice next month as planned." Marcus gestured for her to sit. "Thank you, Jae-yun. How are the other investigations going?" Jae-yun placed a tablet on his desk and activated it. A holographic display showed various documents and statistics floating in the air between them. "We've been tracking Park's cases for the past 5 years. The pattern is clear. Earth-born lawyers lose 78% of cases in his court, while Korean lawyers win 82% of similar cases. And the other judges? Not as extreme, but the bias exists throughout the system. Park is just the most obvious about it." Jae-yun's fingers moved through the holographic display, bringing up more documents. "We've also found evidence of communication between Park and several major corporations before key rulings." Marcus nodded slowly. "Including Starpath Enterprises?" "Yes. Their legal department sent messages to Park's private account 3 days before your hearing." Jae-yun's expression was grim. "This goes beyond simple prejudice, Marcus. The whole system is tangled up in corporate interests and old colonial politics, which is exactly why we need to handle this carefully," Marcus said. He stood and walked to the window, watching the streams of flying vehicles outside. The colonists left Earth because they wanted independence. They built something impressive here, but they brought their old prejudices with them, dressed them up in new ways. "The council is ready to act," Jae-yun said. "We can start the reforms as soon as your appointment is announced." Marcus turned back to her. "No. First, we need to understand exactly how deep this goes. I want you to contact Young Hee-yoon at the New Seoul Times." Jae-yun raised an eyebrow. "The investigative journalist? Won't that tip our hand?" "Not if we're careful. Young Hee has been trying to expose judicial corruption for years. Give her some of the less sensitive data, enough to start publishing stories about the bias in the courts, but nothing about the council's involvement yet. As they discussed the details, Marcus's tablet chimed with a message. It was from Do-Young Kim, the court clerk. Judge Park denied your appeal. He didn't even read it. I'm sorry. Marcus showed the message to Jae-yun. And that's why we need to do this right. It's not about Park, or me, or any single case. It's about making sure justice actually means something. Later that evening, Marcus visited one of New Seoul's older neighborhoods, where traditional Korean houses still stood between the modern buildings. He entered a small restaurant where Byung-ho Choi, a former clerk who had worked for Park, was waiting. The restaurant was quiet, with old-style paper lanterns casting soft light on wooden tables. Byung-ho was nervous, his fingers tapping constantly on his cup of tea. "Thank you for meeting me," Marcus said, sitting down across from him. "I shouldn't be here," Byung-ho said quietly. "If Park finds out." "He won't," Marcus assured him. "I just need you to tell me what you saw when you worked for him." Byung-ho looked around the empty restaurant before speaking. It wasn't just the bias in the courtroom. He had meetings, private meetings with corporate lawyers before big cases. He changed records sometimes, marked Earth-filed appeals as reviewed when he never even opened them. Did he ever talk about why he did these things? He used to say the colonies needed to stay strong, stay pure. That Earth was trying to take control again through the courts. Byung-ho's voice was bitter. "My sister married an Earthman. Park found out, and suddenly I wasn't welcome in his court anymore." As Marcus listened to Byung-ho's story, his tablet silently received another message. This one was from Young Hee-yoon. "Got the data. First story runs tomorrow. Are you sure you don't want to comment on record?" Marcus sent a quick, no comment needed reply. The pieces were falling into place. In the coming weeks, Young Hee's stories would expose the pattern of discrimination in the courts. The public would start asking questions, and when the council finally announced his appointment, the changes would have support from both Earth and the colonies. On his way home that night, Marcus stopped at the courthouse. It was almost empty, with just a few cleaning robots moving silently through the halls. He stood in front of Park's courtroom, remembering the judge's dismissive tone, his sneering comments about Earth lawyers. "Mr. Johnson, it was Do-Young, working late again. I didn't expect to see you here." "Just thinking, Do-Young." Marcus smiled at the clerk. "Tell me, why did you decide to work in the courts?" Do-Young looked surprised by the question. "I believed in justice. My parents came from Earth, but I was born here. I thought the law would be fair, would treat everyone equally." He paused. "I was naive." "No," Marcus said softly. "You weren't naive. You were right. Justice should be equal. And soon, it will be." Back at his apartment, Marcus received one final call for the day. It was Sun-woo Baek, the current Chief Justice preparing to step down. "The council confirmed everything today," Sun-woo said. "In 1 month, you'll be announced as my replacement. Are you ready for what comes next?" Marcus looked out his window at the New Seoul skyline, where Earth hung like a blue jewel in the night sky. "Yes," he said. "It's time for things to change." As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about Park, about the corrupted system he represented, and about all the people, Earthborn and colonial alike, who deserved better. In 1 month, everything would change. But for now, he had more cases to handle, more evidence to gather, and more groundwork to lay. Tomorrow, Young Hee's first story would break. Tomorrow, the first cracks would appear in the facade of colonial justice. And tomorrow, Marcus Johnson would walk back into Park's courtroom, knowing that sometimes the best revenge was simply doing what was right, no matter how long it took. The stars shone brightly over New Seoul that night, Earth and Mars both visible in the clear sky. Somewhere in the city, Judge Park slept peacefully, unaware that his comfortable world of privilege and prejudice was about to be turned upside down. Justice was coming, not with a bang or a shout, but with the quiet, unstoppable force of truth. Young Hee-yoon sat at her desk in the New Seoul Times building, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing court records, legal documents, and statistics. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the city's skyline, but she had been working all night. Her first article about judicial bias had caused quite a stir, and she was preparing the next piece in her series. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. It was from another former clerk who had worked in Judge Park's court. This was the fifth whistleblower to come forward since her first article was published a week ago. The evidence keeps piling up, she muttered to herself, adding the new information to her growing database. Her articles had started with simple statistics: Earth-born lawyers losing cases at much higher rates, appeals being rejected without review, colonial businesses winning suspiciously often. But now people were coming forward with personal stories. Her office door slid open, and her editor, Da-Ho Shin, walked in. "Young-hee, have you seen the morning numbers? Your article has been shared over 2 million times across the colonies." Young-hee nodded, not looking up from her work. "And have you seen Judge Park's response? He claims I'm trying to undermine colonial independence." "Let him talk," Da-Ho said, sitting down across from her desk. "The numbers speak for themselves. What's your next angle?" Young-hee gestured at one of the holographic displays, expanding a document. "I found something interesting. Judge Park's daughter, Min-ji Park, works as a public defender. She mainly represents poor colonial citizens who can't afford private lawyers. And look at her case record." The document showed Min-ji's cases over the past 3 years. She had an impressive record of winning cases for her clients, even against wealthy corporations. But there was something odd about the pattern. "She never appears in her father's courtroom," Da-Ho noticed. "Exactly," Young-hee said. "And I interviewed some of her clients. She's actually a strong advocate for legal reform. She believes the system is biased against both Earth-born citizens and poor colonials." Later that day, Young-hee met with Byung-ho Choi, the former clerk, in a quiet corner of a public park. The area was designed to look like an old earth garden, with real trees brought from Korea centuries ago. "There's more," Byung-ho said, nervously looking around. "Judge Park doesn't just meet with corporate lawyers. He's part of a group called the Colonial Heritage Association. They believe Earth is trying to take control of the colonies through economic and legal means." Young-hee recorded everything on her tablet. "Do you have proof of these meetings?" Byung-ho pulled out a small data chip, security camera footage. "They meet in the old district, in a traditional tea house. I copied this before I left my job. I've been afraid to share it until now." As Young-hee reviewed the footage, her eyes widened. The video showed Judge Park meeting with several other judges and corporate executives. They were discussing ways to ensure that Earth-based companies would lose their cases, how to protect colonial interests from Earth interference. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Johnson was meeting with Jae-yun Cho in a secure room at the Interstellar Judicial Council's local office. The walls were designed to block any electronic surveillance. "Young-hee's articles are having an effect," Jae-yun reported. "Public opinion is shifting. People are starting to question the system." Marcus reviewed the latest polling data on his tablet. "What about the other colonies? Mars, Europa?" "Similar patterns of bias in their courts too," Jae-yun said. "But New Seoul is the worst. It's the oldest colony with the most entrenched prejudices. And the strongest connection to Earth," Marcus added, "which makes the prejudice even more ironic. These colonies were built on cooperation between Earth and Korea. The first ships that came here carried mixed crews." Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent message. Do-young Kim, the court clerk, had sent them a warning. Judge Park was planning to make a public statement the next day, defending his record and attacking Young-hee's articles. "Let him," Marcus said calmly. "The more he talks, the more people will see the truth." That evening, Young-hee visited Min-ji Park, Judge Park's daughter, at her small office in the Public Defender's Building. Unlike her father's grand chambers, Min-ji's workspace was cramped and cluttered with case files. "I've read your articles," Min-ji said as soon as Young-hee sat down. You're right about the bias in the system. I see it every day. Are you willing to go on record? Yum-hee asked, trying to hide her surprise. Min-ji's hands tightened on her desk. My father, he's not a bad man. He truly believes he's protecting our heritage. But he's wrong. The law should protect everyone equally, even if it means speaking out against your own father. Especially then, Min-ji said firmly. Someone once told me that justice is like air. If it's not the same for everyone, it's not justice at all. The next morning, Judge Park held his press conference on the courthouse steps. He stood tall in his judicial robes, surrounded by supporters from the Colonial Heritage Association. These accusations are an attack on our colonial independence, he declared, his voice carried by hovering media drones. Earth wants to control our courts, just as they once tried to control our ancestors. We will not allow it. But as he spoke, something unexpected happened. A group of young lawyers, both Earthborn and colonial, stood silently on the steps behind him. They held up tablets showing statistics from Yum-hee's articles. The images were captured by the media drones and broadcast alongside Park's speech. In her office, Yum-hee watched the scene unfold on multiple screens. Her computer was constantly updating with new messages from more whistleblowers, more people wanting to share their stories of experiencing bias in the courts. She began writing her next article, titled Justice in the Stars: The True Cost of Prejudice. This piece would include Min-ji's interview, the security footage from the Colonial Heritage Association meetings, and testimony from dozens of lawyers and clients who had faced discrimination. As she wrote, Yum-hee received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. Keep digging. Something big is coming next month. The whole system is about to change. She tried to trace the message, but it had been sent through multiple secure relays. The sender knew what they were doing. Yum-hee smiled to herself. She loved a good mystery. Across the city, Marcus Johnson prepared for another day in court. He had 3 cases scheduled, 2 of them in Judge Park's courtroom. The judge would be even harder on him now, after Yum-hee's articles. But that was fine. Every unfair ruling, every biased comment, every dismissed appeal was just more evidence for what was coming. In his office at home, Marcus looked at the official document that would soon change everything: his appointment as Chief Justice of the Interstellar Judicial Council. The announcement was just weeks away now. But before that, there was more groundwork to lay, more evidence to gather, more stories to be told. He thought about Min-ji Park, standing up for justice despite her father's beliefs. He thought about Do-young Kim, quietly documenting every instance of bias in the court records. He thought about Yum-hee Yoon, working tirelessly to expose the truth. Change was coming, not through force or confrontation, but through the patient, persistent revelation of truth. The stars outside his window seemed to shine a little brighter, as if they too were waiting for justice to finally reach every corner of human space. In his drawer, Marcus kept a small piece of paper with a quote from an ancient Earth judge. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Soon, very soon, that arc would reach New Seoul, and Judge Park would learn that true justice knew no boundaries, no prejudices, and no fear. The New Seoul Grand Conference Center sparkled in the morning light. Today was the annual judicial conference, where judges and lawyers from all colonies gathered to discuss the state of interstellar law. The main hall was filled with people in formal attire, their quiet conversations creating a soft buzz in the air. Judge Ta-won Park sat in the front row, looking confident despite the recent controversy. Yum-hee Yoon's articles had caused a stir, but he still had many supporters. The Colonial Heritage Association had made sure of that. Next to him sat several other judges who shared his views about keeping Earth influence out of colonial courts. Marcus Johnson entered the hall quietly and took a seat near the back. Few people noticed him. Those who did probably wondered why an Earth lawyer would attend such an important colonial event. Do-young Kim, the court clerk, saw him and gave a slight nod. They both knew what was about to happen. Sun Moo Baek, The current Chief Justice of the Interstellar Judicial Council stepped onto the stage. The old judge looked tired but determined. The room fell silent as he approached the podium. For 30 years, Sunwoo began, I have served as your Chief Justice. I have watched humanity spread across the stars, building new homes, new societies, new systems of law. Today, I announce my retirement. Murmurs filled the room. Everyone knew this was coming, but the timing was significant. Sunwoo raised his hand for silence. But before I step down, we must address the serious issues that have been raised about our judicial system. The recent articles by Young Hee-yoon have shown clear evidence of bias in our courts. Judge Park shifted in his seat. His face showed anger, but he remained silent. We have forgotten a fundamental truth, Sunwoo continued. Justice cannot exist where prejudice lies. The law must protect all people equally, whether they were born on Earth, in the colonies, or on ships traveling between the stars. Young Hee-yoon sat in the press section, recording everything. She noticed Jae-yun Cho, the council secretary, moving toward the stage with a data tablet in her hands. Therefore, Sunwoo said, the council has conducted a thorough investigation of our courts. We found systematic bias against Earth-born citizens, corporate influence over judicial decisions, and violation of basic legal principles. Now Judge Park stood up. This is outrageous. You're attacking colonial independence. We have the right to deny justice to others. A new voice asked. Everyone turned to see Min-ji Park, Judge Park's daughter, standing in the center aisle. Father, you taught me that the law should protect everyone. But that's not what you've been doing. The room was completely silent now. Judge Park stared at his daughter in shock. Min-ji, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Min-ji said firmly. I've seen the evidence. I've watched you dismiss cases without reading them, just because the lawyers were from Earth. That's not justice. That's prejudice. Sunwoo spoke again. Judge Park, would you like to respond to these accusations? To explain why Earth-born lawyers lose 78% of cases in your court? To justify your private meetings with corporate executives before their cases? Park's face was red with anger. I don't have to explain myself to you. The colonies must remain strong, independent. We can't let Earth control our courts again. No one is trying to control the courts, Sunwoo said calmly. We're trying to ensure they serve justice equally for all. And speaking of justice, he smiled slightly. I believe it's time to announce my successor as Chief Justice. Marcus Johnson stood up. The movement drew all eyes to him. He walked slowly toward the stage, his steps echoing in the silent hall. No, Park whispered, realization dawning on his face. It's not possible. Marcus Johnson, Sunwoo announced, has been appointed as the new Chief Justice of the Interstellar Judicial Council. His appointment was confirmed unanimously by representatives from Earth and all colonies. Marcus reached the stage and turned to face the audience. Judge Park had fallen back into his seat, his face pale. 1 month ago, Marcus said, his voice clear and strong, I stood in Judge Park's courtroom. He mocked my Earth origins, dismissed my evidence, and denied justice to my clients. But this isn't about personal revenge. He activated a large holographic display above the stage. It showed court records, statistics, and evidence from Young Hee's investigation. This is about fixing a broken system, about remembering that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't just reaching the stars. It was bringing justice with us. Colonial independence doesn't mean colonial prejudice. Young Hee was typing frantically, recording every word. This would be her biggest story yet. As your new Chief Justice, Marcus continued, I am implementing immediate reforms. Every case decided in the past 5 years where bias can be shown will be reviewed. Judges will be required to provide detailed explanations for their rulings. And most importantly, we will establish a new oversight committee with equal representation from Earth and the colonies. He looked directly at Judge Park. Those who have abused their power will be held accountable. But our goal isn't punishment, it's correction. We must build a system that serves all of humanity. Min-ji Park walked to her father's side and put a hand on his shoulder. "Father," she said softly, "this is a chance to make things right." Judge Park looked up at Marcus on the stage, then at his daughter. The anger seemed to drain from his face, replaced by something that looked like shame. I thought I was protecting our heritage," he said quietly. "Our true heritage," Min-ji replied, "is justice itself. That's what the first colonists brought with them from Earth. That's what we need to preserve." Over the next few hours, Marcus outlined his plans for reform. The conference hall buzzed with discussion, debate, and eventually, acceptance. Even some of Park's supporters began to nod as they understood the vision of a truly fair system. Do Young Kim approached Marcus during a break. "I've been keeping records," he said, offering a data chip. "Every case where I saw bias, every appeal that was ignored, everything." Marcus took the chip with a smile. "Thank you, Do Young. Your courage in documenting these issues will help us fix the system." As the conference ended, Young Hee published her final article in the series, Justice Reborn. Earth lawyer becomes Chief Justice, promises reform. The story spread across Earth and all colonies within hours. Judge Park submitted his resignation that evening, but before he left the conference center, he stopped by Marcus's new office. "I was wrong," Park said simply. "About you, about Earth, about everything." Marcus nodded. "The question is, what will you do now to make it right?" Park straightened his shoulders. "I want to help, to fix what I broke, to show others like me that we were wrong." "Then let's begin," Marcus said, gesturing to a chair. "There's much work to be done." As night fell over New Seoul, Marcus stood at his office window, looking at the stars. Earth shone brightly among them, no longer a symbol of division, but a reminder of humanity's shared origin and shared future. Jae-yun entered with a stack of data tablets. "The reform proposals are ready for review, Chief Justice." Marcus smiled at his new title. "Thank you, Jae-yun. Let's make sure justice reaches every corner of human space." Outside, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere in those lights, Young Hee was writing her next story. Min-ji was preparing to defend her next client, and Do-young was organizing court records for the coming reviews. They were all part of something bigger now, the long, difficult work of making justice truly universal. The stars watched silently as humanity took another step forward, learning once again that the greatest journeys aren't just about reaching new worlds, but about bringing the best of ourselves with us when we do.